again. We're going to get started with the refining and petrochemical session. My name is Amrita Sen, and I am a director of research at Energy Aspects, and I'm joined by an extremely distinguished panel. As you can see, I'm not going to read out all their names. You can see their names and designations right up there. And it is going to be a very, very fascinating discussion, because what I do want to start off with is really talking about how we, or where we are in the energy landscape when it comes to refining, particularly at a time when everybody only wants to talk about energy transition. I think we have to really take a step back and acknowledge the fact that refining as a sector is perhaps the most affected by energy transition, simply because it probably has one of the longest lead times when it comes to being an industry. What we constantly hear is oil demand is about to peak. As an industry, we remain pessimistic, and dare I say, we continue to incorrectly judge oil demand. IEA in particular has constantly come out and talked about the requirement to not need oil in the next couple of years, let alone in the next few decades, which then makes it very, very difficult for executives who are joining me here today to, when they go up and ask for investment in the refining sector, it is therefore very difficult for anybody to finance a refinery if you simply do not believe that oil demand is going to be around. This year is going to be the last year for a few years now that the new greenfield refineries are going to come online. Dangote in Nigeria and Dos Bocas in Mexico will be those two that start up this year. After that, India has a few in plan, but nobody else is building any refineries anywhere in the world. Expansions are taking place, but to get new refinery financing is getting harder and harder. And that goes back to this concept and this issue of green energy and transition, and this notion that apparently we are not going to need oil demand. On our numbers, we actually see from 2026 to 2030, only 500,000 barrels per day of net new capacity additions coming up each year. 500,000 barrels per day is nothing compared to oil demand growth of at least 1 to 1.5 million barrels per day each year. So there is likely to be a deficit of products, transportation products in particular, in the coming years, because where the investment is continuing is on the petrochemical side. And if anything, right now, we are oversupplied on petrochemicals, in part because the Chinese economy is slowing. So there's a lot to unpack over here. It also means that even if crude prices stay relatively stable at $80, gasoline and diesel cracks are likely to remain elevated. We've seen elevated margins over the last few years. And it could easily mean that crude could be 80 and gasoline and diesel could be 120 or 140. So as consumers, the pressures will still be there. So with that, I am actually going to start with Dr. Ayed Al-Qahtani from OPEC. Ayed, you have really taken a different stance in the sense that we are constantly, and particularly the West, we are both based there in the West, hear about IEA and about how we are not going to need oil. You came out last year and you said, no, you know what? Not only is peak oil demand going to be higher, but it is actually going to take longer to hit the peak. So tell us a bit more about that.
Thank you, Amrita. Very apt question. Thanks to the Indian government for the kind invitation and the organizers for putting together such a distinguished event. So I wouldn't call us optimistic about our demand projections. I would call it rather objective and robust. We expect the global oil demand growth this year to grow at 2.2 million barrels per day. This is down from the 2.5 that we've seen last year. Next year, we expect it to taper off slightly to 1.8 million barrels per day, which is considered to be a very robust, healthy demand growth by historical standards. This year, on absolute levels, we expect to average the year at around north of 104 million barrels in absolute global demand level. by the fourth quarter will be north of 105 million barrels per day. I don't need to remind you, Amrita, that we went through this discussion back last year when we were thought that we are very optimistic about putting 2.5 or 2.2 million barrels per day demand expectation for last year. That was back in January. We held our ground. We believed that the demand growth in 2023 will be robust. Evidently, we concluded the year at an average of 2.5 million barrels, given the historical numbers. The secondary sources, they were below 2 million barrels. They had to revise their projections upward. They ended the year on an average of 2.2. Now, how do we see the medium term? We expect the year 2028 to see at least 110 million barrels per day, and then we will see an additional 6 million to the run-up to 2045. So between 2022 and 2045, we see an incremental additional demand of at least 60 million barrels per day. Why would we need that much oil? Because we had to come up with 23% additional energy demand. We had to cater to that much energy in order for us to attend to the 1.5 million people that are expected to see the world. That's another India coming over the next 23 years or so. Doubling the global economy will necessitate a lot of energy. So we are doubling the global economy, but rather putting forward only 23% additional energy, and that's considering a very generous assumption on energy efficiency. We can delve into where that incremental 16 million barrels per day will come from. Will come mainly from the transportation sector. Will command around 9 million barrels of that growth. Road transport as well as aviation, around 4.5 each. And then petrochemicals, which will play to the core of this session. We see north of 4 million barrels per day of that additional 60 million going to the petrochemicals. Getting into the fuels, and we can dissect it, we see aviation because we expect the aviation fleet to double at least going forward to 2045. We think that there will be at least 45,000 new planes hitting the skies. We expect to double our transportation fleets. We see an additional 1 billion in addition to the 1 billion existing additional fleets. And this is to move people around. Most, if not the entire oil demand growth going forward, will be from the non-OECD countries, developing nations. We see the non-OECD growing by a hefty 25 million barrels between 2022 and 2045. That will be counterbalanced by demand shrinking, contracting in the OECD countries of 10 million. So the netto is around 16 million barrels per day growth going forward. The developing countries is where the most of the economic growth will be. India, as an example, will grow its economy at least triple it from the 11 trillion to north of 33 trillion. Same thing for China, almost doubling. So humongous economic growth, mainly from south-south, and that will need to be attended to, catering a lot of energy to fuel this, and oil will still reside at the pyramid of the energy ladder. We see the oil share remaining plus minus 30, dropping from 31% 2022 down to only 29% for 2045, and it will still be ranked number 1 going forward. Now we hear a lot about the demand peaking between now and 2030, which is only 6 years from now. If we will close this year at a level of 105, and then we only see an additional 11 million barrels to 2045, we are quite rather bearish on the 116. As a matter of fact, we play few scenarios, and those who are not familiar with our world oil outlook, I advise you to have a look at it. We play 2 scenarios, a laissez-faire, just in case if the policies, and we've seen a lot of U-turn worldwide, mainly in the West. We reside in Europe, and we see the British government, the German, the French, public resistance to some of the overly optimistic green policies being instated regardless of the cost. So we have to be rational. We have to bring senses into the discussion in order for us to avoid misleading the population and hindering the economic growth going forward. I think a lot of the policies that we've heard about when it comes to energy transitioning, and we've been transitioning for ages, I think they are in the ill-advising the policymakers, heading the wrong direction, misplacing investments, putting probably money where it shouldn't be to start with. We see a lot of maybe withdrawal of electrification, Tesla situation as an example, and I don't need to pinpoint, but I'm mentioning them as an example of electric vehicles, and probably we can delve into that at a later discussion, but I'll leave it at that.
No, thank you. I think the points you make actually pose a fascinating set of questions, and I'm going to start with you, Mr. Krishnakumar, if I may. To Ayed's point, right, if we are already going to be, and I completely agree, our numbers show very similar, 104, 105 this year, then you've got the likes of IEA saying we'll only be 107, 108, but, and even on our numbers, even when you peak, let's say in the 2030s or 40s, it's a plateau after that. Oil demand isn't collapsing, right? Refining, let's say nameplate capacity globally is about 100 million barrels per day, but operable capacity is more like 80 because you've got refining in Venezuela that doesn't operate. China, we'll come on to China, the policy is different. Yet, today the challenge is in the West, to tick your greenhouse gas emission reduction, you choose a refinery to close down because you hit 50% of your reduction targets. So in that space, I mean, obviously India, I feel, is in a golden position to build more capacity. What's your view on this, and what do you think is the future for Indian refining?
Thank you, Amrita, for having me on the panel. Very apt question for India as well. If you look at some basic numbers, India today is about 5.1 million barrels of oil equivalent per day, which will go up to 11.6 million barrels per day by 2045. Gas is about 1 million barrels equivalent, oil equivalent, and now that will go up to 4.1. This will be largely driven by transportation fuels as well as petchem and the gasification of the economy. So in India, although there is a scope for renewable energy to grow, but it will have to be balanced. If you look at some of the primary reason for a country like India, which has humongous potential to grow, there is a humongous underlying economic activity happening. Two basic reasons which will drive oil demand to continue is one, unless there is a competitive alternate energy source, oil will continue to be affordable. That's number one. Number two, energy security solutions will be provided by oil and gas till an alternate energy solutions mature and come in play. Although India will pursue its commitment to environment as we go forward, to balance the economic growth as well as its aspirations to be an economic power, every energy model demand projection projects about 400 to 425 million metric tons of refining capacity which we will need. Today, you are only about 255 million metric tons, so there's a humongous scope there for it. In the next few years, for example, we are going from 35 to 40, about 50 million metric tons by 35, but others together will be only about 50. So there is about 150 million metric tons of refining capacity which we will need definitely in the coming years to come. And the only way which we need to do is we'll need to have a balanced pathway of investments. We should not be over-investing or under-investing so that you're taken care of for the next 15 years.
It's such an important point that the balance to strike between over-investment and under-investment. The challenge is that refining is minimum 5 to 7 years. So if you're not investing right now, you're not going to get the new refinery till at least 2030. So I'm going to bring in both Mr. Panicker and Mr. Das on this. So our PM told us yesterday that we need to be 450 million tons of capacity by 2040, if not earlier. I think he said the same thing last year. Why isn't it happening yet? You want to start first, Mr. Panicker?
First of all, thank you very much for this great opportunity. Thank you. Great question, but you know that India has started this journey of adding refining capacity for a long time. we are still exporting a lot of products from India. So we have got capacity to deal with the next 5-6 years of growth. Second thing, at the highest level in the government, clarity is there that India needs almost doubling of the capacity in 10 to 15 years. And that also would be definitely achieved. While we are speaking about the conventional energy versus renewable energy, probably yesterday the speech and also the last 1 year, it is evolving that it is not going to be only conventional. It is going to be conventional and only renewable. It is going to be conventional and renewable. So let us leave aside. But the signals today also, you see, we are in a small hole. Biofuel is having in a bigger hole. So the messages are coming that we are going more and more to renewable energy fund. That is not correct. For a country like India, it has no other example from any other developed country. We have got a twin objective. Has been made very clear yesterday that we need to be a developed country by 2047. You know the amount of energy consumption required to reach that level, which means that 1.42 billion means maybe at that point of time, 1.6 billion people have to have a very good lifestyle. This need a lot of energy. At the same time, India as a country is very conscious about the emission. We have to meet both these standards. And we in the refining sector from India is already identified this as a challenge. And you were speaking about only 2 refineries coming up, but India has already declared large capacity additions, both in PSUs and also 3 new refineries are actually coming up in India. So very consciously, India is moving in the right path. Second thing, on the renewable energy fund and on the emission reduction, we have to be conscious. It's not that we can expand or build a new refinery in the way we built in 80s or 70s, because there would be a cost of carbon emission by the time you set up a refinery. So that has to be a factor we have to be very conscious. Second is on the gestation period and above that, the willingness of the banks to invest in a new refinery. This is a major issue now, because that again due to the various signals coming from various agencies. For example, in Europe, the green parties are getting more votes.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it is the people who decide now which direction we have to move. But that is not applicable to India. And whatever, even the current China situation is also not applicable to India, because India's requirements are different. Yeah. So in the nutshell, India needs a completely different strategy to ensure that we have got additional refining capacity. And the refiners in India are fully convinced that we need at least doubling capacity by 2035. We never believe that there is going to be any peak of gasoline or gas oil soon enough. Maybe at least 25 years it is not going to happen the way in which it is happening, because we are hearing about this peaking for the last 15 years.
Yes, exactly.
And it never peaked. And before that, people saying that oil is going to end. It never ended. The reserve is every year it is adding so high that whether it is going to peak due to demand or whether it is going to peak due to oil, it was an issue. Now it is almost clear that this peak is not going to happen anywhere soon in India. So this is the right place to invest for refining. Absolutely no doubt. But we have to give more positive signals. So thank you very much for you taking up and arguing for setting up refining capacity in India, where there are many signals coming that it is not going to happen. You are very right, 2030 we commission, then it is going to be only for 10 years, then peak is going to happen. None of these are going to happen. We need energy. At the same time, in the design aspect, we have to be conscious to have very competitive on cost as well as Krishnakumar said, on the cost part as well as on the emission reduction options.
Yeah, Mr. Das, before that, Ayed, in your next report, I think what Mr. Panicker is saying, you need to do a blue box to explain what percentage growth is. Whenever people are like, oh, biofuels is growing the fastest, I think they forget that it's coming from 0.001, and therefore, percentage-wise, of course, is going to grow the fastest. I think we need to do some education on that.
Same applies, I guess, to the renewables. We expect them to grow from their current level of 2% to north of 13% at an extraordinary annual growth rate of 7%. But
Yes.
A big number of a small number is still small.
Small number, exactly. Mr. Das.
From the introduction which you gave, it appears that you have got two things. Number one, India should more refineries. And number two, we should not concentrate on petrochemicals. Right?
Oh, that's a good segue to come to Aramco soon after this, but go on.
Okay, so let me, I was very impressed by the people who are sitting here. 10 o'clock, with all the confusion, this is house full and overfull. Why is it so? Because they are all refinery people. We were importing products in 1998. If you recall, they were rationing on petrol and diesel in 1998. To come 2023, we are the largest exporter of petroleum product in the world.
Yeah.
And you think we are not putting refineries? I'm amazed to see that. Let me put some numbers and then you can decide for yourself. 860 million ton of oil equivalent is the total energy consumption in the country, all put together. 863 to be precise, PPAC figure, not my figure. 27% oil, 5% gas, 5% renewable, 55% coal, and rest is all others, nuclear and others. Right? 270 oil and so that's the big number. Yesterday, Prime Minister told 7.5 growth. So we will be consuming more energy. 860, you take it 6-7%, we require 40 to 50 million ton of oil equivalent every year extra energy. From where it will come? Currently, renewable are giving us 40 million ton oil equivalent. Every year we require 40 to 50 extra. It has to come from oil. Or fossil fuel, we have no option. Even if, I'm for renewable. We are putting a lot of things on renewable, but there is enough for everybody on the plate. Plate is getting bigger and bigger. So there is no competition with renewable or transition. There is no competition in anywhere. Everything will grow. So that's background. Now come to refinery. Come to refinery. Nobody is putting. 50 million ton I can count now. Sitting here, IOC, everybody, 50 million ton I can count now, which is either is under construction or have been committed or where the financing has been supplied. 50 million ton, enough. And more will come depending on various other factors. So I don't think that our job is at stake. So don't feel scared that oil and gas sector is going away. It's going to be there. And why against petrochemical? We consume 13 million ton of polymer every year. 13 million ton of polymer. We just produce little less than that. See, we import something. Again, 9% growth. We require one cracker every year. So put refinery, put petrochemical. Why? Or either or. There is no either or. You put everything. Still there will be a deficit. So we are also thinking of everything. All companies right here, right in front, they are all thinking of refinery and petrochemical and chemical. Thank you.
And by the way, speaking of, I know it's very crammed at the back. I can see a couple of seats. So if you do want to come and sit, do come forward as well. I think, Dr. Faisal, Mr. Das has just led straight into you in terms of petrochemicals. So my argument about petrochemicals was not about India. India clearly is short petrochemicals, it requires it. The challenge we see, and Saudi Aramco is at the heart of it, and you in particular, is globally led by China. We have added so much petrochemical capacity, over 20 to 25 million tons for the last few years. And if you look at the projections we have between 25 and 26, we are adding another 20 million tons of capacity. And 26 onwards, refining capacity growth on our numbers is only 500,000 barrels per day net of closure. petrochemicals is 0.7 million barrels per day. So we're adding more. And China was supposed to be this big demand center, but their property market is really struggling, so they're consuming less. So we do have overcapacity on a global basis, right? So what's your take on that in terms of global petrochemicals? Where do you see India in that as well?
Good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you for having me part of this STEAM session. I'm very happy to be part of this session. I'm a refiner in the past and now in petrochemicals. So,
see, he's claiming both.
so I agree. It should not be either or. It can be both together. In Saudi Aramco, I think we are the largest refiner. We have capacity of 7 million barrels along with our partners. And if we take it on equity basis, it's 4 million barrels. So we have been investing in refineries. Our last refinery reached full capacity last year, Jazan refinery, 400,000 barrels. So we are big in refineries. So we are not trying to say refineries are not good. We are not saying petrochemicals will replace refineries. But as I have mentioned, there will be big demand on petrochemicals. And all the studies are saying petrochemicals will be the fastest demand for oil. So there is an opportunity, and there is a demand for petrochemicals. More people, petrochemicals in every industry. I think if we look around here, everything is almost petrochemicals. Yesterday also in the ministerial session, they mentioned if you look at the car, it's 60-70% petrochemical parts. So there is no competition between refining and petrochemicals. If you set the stage for a need for refineries, I'm sure most of the companies will invest. But all what we are hearing that refineries are all technologies, refineries are not needed anymore, there will be less demand on gasoline and diesel. So we are as a business people, and we were talking in the morning, if it makes money, we will do it. If there is financial support for these projects, there will be a need for that. But also additional refining capacity does not mean or should not only come from new refineries. You can retrofit and upgrade existing refineries, and at the same time you will be producing more refineries. What we are trying to do, we are trying to convert more oil to chemicals. That's a future without impacting our existing refinery capacity. We are trying to take advantage of the 4 million, so we are trying to convert 4 million oil equivalent, and we call it liquid to chemical because it's not only crude, there are some liquid hydrocarbons. We are taking it to chemicals to enable downstream industry in the kingdom and work with our partners for more chemicals because there will be a need for more chemicals. Again, there is no competition with the refining, and the refining business needs to exist, but needs to be exist on a basis and commercial basis. There will be demand in some locations where they invest. You just mentioned Nigeria and Mexico. In Saudi, we reached the full demand and we are exporting. As I said, we have 4 million capacity in equity shares. We have refineries all over the place. And we are trying now to integrate refineries with petrochemicals. So we may be able to address the demand for chemicals by producing more chemicals if there is a demand and there is a good market, or switch to gasoline, diesel, fuel type if there is a demand. So it's an integrated refinery and petrochemicals approach, which address Mr. Das. It's both together, not either or.
So a quick question, Mr. Panicker, to you, because you mentioned financing, right? Are you saying, to Dr. Faisal's point, that in some ways, if it's an integrated refiner with petrochemicals, is then financing easier?
No, there is a major advantage of integration. When you are talking about petrochemical versus crude capacity expansion, a combination is always better. Why it is better? Because tomorrow, which is going to peak first is definitely oil, whenever it happens. So an existing refinery converting into a petrochemical feedstock producing machine is an easy process. Maybe currently you may be about 10% of feedstock. going up to 40-50% with the current available technology, it is an easy thing. Instead of going for 70 to 75% oil to chemical. So as the demand for fuels coming down, there is an option to gradually convert into a petrochemical feedstock. So that is actually always give us a better economics compared to an independent fuel producer and an independent petrochemical. So integration happens to be the best option. And India realized it much earlier. Now we have already started integrating. Even in 80s, when world has gone for BTX process, now we started making benzene and toluene. In 90s, we have seen FCCs upgrading and making propylene. And you know, now ethylene crackers are coming. So that integration, as demand grows for petrochemical, will happen. And as of now, technology is available to go up to 40% of feedstock. So when we are showing on a long-term better economics, then the financing would be much better than talking about some industry which people are saying going to be not available after 20 years. So this is the thing that is our experience also, that a combination sometimes appears to be a better option because of the real hedging also. You know that you are very happy to note that you are predicting an extremely good refining margin up to 30s because nobody is investing, demand is going. That is very good for all of us. We need refining margins. But at the same time, India needs petrochemical. And it is also our responsibility to ensure that this product is available economically. For that, it is always better to integrate. This would satisfy both the country's requirement as well as a lender's requirement. Is probably the best option.
I want to come on to China because that's also very integral to margins. But before that, Ayed, if I can ask you, and then I'm going to come to Mr. Krishnakumar as well, on India in particular, right? Because to your point earlier, Indian demand growth trajectory is massive. So Ayed, in terms of OPEC, and if you just tie in a little bit of EVs, what do you see kind of your projection for Indian demand growth? And then do you really see EVs making a dent within that? And then Mr. Krishnakumar, if you can give the BPCL's perspective on meeting that with a sustainable outlook as well, right? Which I'm sure is a constant challenge.
For India to foresee the economic growth that we anticipated to have, and that is if India is to maintain plus minus 6% throughout 2045, then they are most likely to triple their economy size, reaching $33 trillion. Now, what would it take to reach there? You will have to consume a lot of energy to do that. And if we zoom in the oil game, last year they consumed 5.2 million barrels per day. We expect them to double that at least. We see them having 52 or 53 million vehicles on the road. They are most likely to triple that. Around 20 or so commercial vehicles, trucks. And for an economy to grow that big, that significant, and be a big chunk, 10% of the world economy by 2045, they will have to move a lot of goodies around, especially when it comes to manufacturing and exporting. So there is huge demand coming, albeit from the 5 million, only doubling that, but we are assuming a lot of efficiency improvement, especially when it comes to the ICE technology. And I have to commend our industry for being at the innovative edge when it comes to improving the way we do things. When it comes to the methane emission, carbon capture and sequestration, complementing that to integrated refineries and petrochemicals. When you look into digitization, the use of artificial intelligence and new technologies, the development of the new generation. So the industry will deliver. I'm not worried about the capacity not being there for the next couple of years. Although we see an additional refining capacity of 6.6 million refining capacity between now and 2028, and we can go over the inventory where that is, mostly China, the Middle East, and Africa, and the rest of Asia. We see the 19.2, 19.3 additional refining capacity assumed between now and 2045 to also come from these developing countries. So we're not worried about the capacity being there. The demand will be there, and the industry will be as responsive as it has been in the past. Probably it will come at the expense of a certain utilization rate, increasing north of 83%, hovering around 85. But once the margin is there, once the industry picks up this increase in utilization rate, then it will take 3 to 5 years to plant the pipes in the ground. As for the Indian economy, we talked about its potential growth. The petrochemicals industry mentioned earlier by Dr. Faisal, it's still strongly correlated to the GDP growth. So in the Indian case, if the economy is to grow by 6%, then assume an equivalent rate of growth for petrochemicals. The electric vehicles, electrification, although we see north of 2,000% growth in electrification on the transport fleet, currently we are about 30 million vehicles on the road. We expect it to reach around 600 million electric vehicles. That will be around 23% only of the global fleet. So we are assuming that electrification will take place despite all the constraints that we see, despite all the U-turns that we have registered today in the Western world, let alone the constraints on the critical minerals. So electrification will take place, will grow at a humongous annual growth rate going forward, but the improvement in the ICE technology may beat the break-even point for electrification. Now, the conventional engines, they are improving in their efficiency. Aramco is also an oil company, but it's leading also on the R&D front on that, trying to push the mileage north of 80, 90 miles per gallon, along with some manufacturers. We've seen the technology, carbon capture from mobile objects. While you fill up your gas, you can also dump the carbon that you burned through your trip. So the industry is catching up. And what's pivotal to this discussion, Amrita and colleagues, is to have rational discussion and dialogue. And I think when we look at things objectively, we can come up with sensible argument and sensible policy advice. If we are to see that humongous growth and look into the energy sources that we have in the world, then the constraints that we have in the electrification, in the transport, let alone the intermittency in the power generation, what else would we burn to cater for that growth? And we will have to go back to fossil fuels at large, primarily oil and gas.
No, thank you.
See, we are very bullish about India's economy, so we will be aggressive on the refining capacity, but responsibly we will be doing it. We will be moving largely from transportation to petchem, so we will balance those capacities which we will do. So we feel there is, like I had said just now, petchem we believe is strongly a direct proportion of the GDP of the country. If India is supposed to grow at 7%, we believe in by another 20 years we'll have a 400 billion market size of petchem, which will be a basic building blocks for the buildings, agribusiness, textiles, and all, pharma, and all that stuff. So petchem and will be very, very strong, but we will be very responsible in maintaining the sustainability of the whole way. We will now adapt a lot of emission controls and energy efficiencies in our refineries. Where we feel we need to reinvent the processes, we will optimize it and reinvent. We suggest also, because one of the basic reasons is that we need to increase the green refinery model into our refinery system, because there's a lot of complaints about emissions. So we need to be responsible in that. EVs, for example, today is growing, but one thing which we need to keep in mind is it is fed not by green power, it is fed by normal power. So there is no much displacement of emissions happening. So we need to be responsible at that. While EVs will remain, it will grow significantly. Maybe by 2050, oil will still have a significant presence in the world. EVs will slowly overtake, or probably biofuels and other, if green hydrogen will overtake in the refinery. So the primary objective will be how responsible we will be building our refineries, moving from cleaner transportation fuels towards the petchem business.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, just one quick statistics when it comes to 2050 oil demand. What really struck me during COVID, April 2020, when we were all at home, right, not being able to move around, the world, 97% of world's industrial production was shut in. As a world, we still consumed 80 million barrels per day. I think we forget that, and I think that is such an important number, that just industrial production, again, I don't know, we were all ordering toasters on Amazon or whatever it was, but it really shows you how much oil consumption is just for and I think that's one thing we forget when we're talking about peak demand, et cetera, how much we need. I want to pivot a little bit towards the export market, and I'm going to come to all our Indian refining chairman over here. But China is the big elephant in the room, right? In 2019, so during COVID, we shut down over 3 million barrels per day of refining capacity. Most of it was in the US. But even prior to that, everybody was very worried about building new refining capacity because China had been building so much. It was becoming this big exporter and competing with India when it came to product. It was sending product to Latin America. But then suddenly post-COVID, China's made a U-turn. Last 3 years, their product export quotas have been capped at 40 million tons. This year, it looks like it's going to be even lower. My last trips to Beijing, very clear indication. We do not want to give out clean product export quotas to pollute the skies, whatever the reason is. We want to give petrochemical exports, right? Then effectively China becomes the Saudi Arabia of refining capacity, if you ask me. They have the spare capacity, but they're not using it, right? That means it is India's opportunity to capture the export market, especially if the West is shutting down refineries. But I want to start with Dr. Faisal over here. Aramco, of course, is investing a lot in China in terms of the petrochemical sector as well. The question I want to ask you is why you're not investing in India? No, I'm joking. But let's talk about China first in terms of your views there and what's going on.
Yeah, of course. I think, as you mentioned, China has been on a growth for many years. We have great partners in China. We appreciate the business with our partners in China. And they are serving partially our strategy to convert liquid to chemical. So China, as you mentioned now, they are building refineries integrated with petrochemicals. But if you look at their conversion, it's above 70-80%. So mainly chemicals. So I think we found a good match with the Chinese companies on the strategy. So we are investing in China because of that main reason. Additionally, I think they are the factory of the world so far. You did not ask me about India, but let me answer on India. We also appreciate the business of Indian companies. We have many customers here. They are using our crude and LPG. There are a lot of discussions with our Indian friends for future investment. This is not the place to talk more about it, but we are discussing seriously with the Indian companies to invest. I don't understand the Chinese strategy not to export fuel, but we like their strategy to produce more chemicals because, again, chemicals and petrochemicals will be the fastest demand for crude oil. And I've just confirmed that. You see that in most of the reports. And it serves our strategy very well in Saudi Aramco, where we take our crude or any hydrocarbons coming from Saudi Arabia and produce chemicals. So this is why, so far, I think there is a good match between the strategies. And this is why you see some late announcement in China. Hopefully, very soon, we will see some announcement in India as well.
Mr. Das, is that announcement with you?
Most welcome.
No, but what do you think in terms of the refining margins and the fact that, I mean, there is a big market share for India to capture in terms of exports. Is that something HMEL is looking at as well, just to be able to export more products?
Come back to China first, because
okay.
I'm a little confused about China, like everybody else. Their policy change overnight, so we can depend on that. Today, no export, tomorrow export, petchem, no petchem. So, what we can do, we should work on that.
Absolutely. That's fair.
What they do, they do. But what we can do, that's what we should be doing here. We should be the last man standing. We should be the last man standing, and that's how we will survive the war. There are many advantages of Middle East. There are many advantages of putting in China. There are many advantages of putting in US. They have got free stock, etc., etc. What we can do, we should do, and what all the refineries. All the stewards are here. They are all doing. We have taken a lot of initiative in getting the best processes. We are building new one, so that's way ahead. Talk to 25 years old refinery, talk to the refinery which we are putting today, we will be more efficient. So that's a given thing. Digitization, I think, India has taken a lead. And there is a money. There is a lot of money on digitization.
Yeah.
I think, we will be the leader. Our cost will be competitive with anybody else. And that's what all these people right in front, they are all doing. So we will be the last man standing. Let China come, let the other world come. So not a problem. We will beat them all over. Okay. Coming to, our export, everybody knows that, export is not a good business. If you are exporting petroleum product, you make less money. If you sell in domestic market, you make little extra money because of custom duty. No secret in that. So we will like to sell in the domestic market, and if not, then we will export, right?
Makes sense, yes.
So our strategy is to sell in domestic market as much as possible. If not, then we will have to export. So that's our strategy, and we are looking to expand. We are looking for partners. So thank you.
Mr. Krishnakumar, BPCL, do you want to expand the export share?
No, we've been very cautious on the exports because the demand in India is much more higher and it makes more economical sense to serve the domestic market. But we're also looking at opportunities abroad. If there is a good opportunity, we will see.
Makes
That's
sense.
the way it makes sense.
Mr. Panicker, why are you not selling more in India than in exporting?
Your statement,
No, I'm kidding,
let
yeah.
me say, first of your statement is not correct. We are selling in India, our focus is only India. So for example, about 5 years back, maybe our domestic sale was 50% and export was 50%, but last year it is more than 70%
Yeah,
it
it
is
went
in the
into
domestic. As Mr. Prabh said, it is better now to sell in India than export. But at the same time, India should be very conscious about the evolving export market. It is not that refineries, if today there is a capacity is building, you have to look at the export market as well if it is profitable. But since India is growing so strong, first we have to ensure that this market is served. Second, you started saying with another statement that about comparison, make it very clear, Mr. Prabh. We are no more worried about China. Those days are gone. We have got a very confident path of progress. You would have seen yesterday. This is a completely different state of the country now. So we are not worried what is actually they are saying. And he also spoke about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a big partner of India. Whatever investment they are saying, no, we are getting crude from them for a very long time. All the refiners has got the term crude. And we have got such a great relationship with Saudi Arabia. So what I'm saying is that we in India has got a clear path where we are moving forward. The clarity is absolutely there. We want to be a developed country. At the same time, even though we have cumulatively emitted only 4%, we want to be a solution to the global change also. So we want a very, very responsible investment to ensure that the emissions are lower. That is what Krishnakumar also said. We are very conscious that how to minimize the emission. But at the same time, we would have refining capacity. My personal view is that not only for the India, we also look at the global market. Global market is not bad. We are exporting 30% and we have absolutely no issue of a global demand.
And that's why I asked, because if China is not exporting as much, I think India, I find, is the best placed to take that because it can also swing, whether it goes east or west. Sorry, you were going to
But
come,
that will also lead to more refining capacity in India if you need to cater to the west. So many of the refineries are shutting down in the west as well.
Yeah, no, that's exactly my point. That I think the Indian expansion should not just be about the domestic market; it should also be about the export market. So maybe the 450 million ton should be raised even further for that. But that's a separate topic, perhaps. Last 10 minutes, and I'm conscious of time. I probably will try and pivot a little bit to a potentially thorny topic, right? ESG. I'm sure as CEOs and chairmen, you come across this all the time. We do, for a fact. Whenever I'm speaking at board meetings, is always about, but ESG metrics are this, ESG metrics are that. one of the biggest challenges I'm sure you face in refining is whether it be financing, but also in terms of your decisions, right? In how you are dealing with ESG. So let me start with you, Mr. Krishnakumar, in terms of what are these challenges that you're facing and how are you dealing with it?
See, there's a dichotomy in the investors want us to be completely green. They don't want us to be, for one, they don't want us to go the normal hydrocarbon way. So that dichotomy now is turning on its head, and so I do not know how ESG will matter anymore going forward. Because the fundamentals of ESG is being questioned with the way after the pandemic. If oil is growing, it's going to peak not now and peak much later. I don't know how ESG concerns are going, but frankly, I'm at a loss. So I don't know how to do it.
I don't think you're the only one at a loss, but that's the problem, right? It's, but that's, I'm sure you still get the questions all the time, right?
We get all the time, but we need to be responsible, address it as much as we can. But that should not hold you back, because we have to grow responsibly.
Yeah. What do you say to people talking to you about ESG, Mr. Das?
No, you have a panel which speak the same language, you have a very difficult time. There's no controversy. So I fully endorse what Mr. Krishnakumar says about the ESG. There are three letters, ESG. How they are connected, I'm yet to find out. Environment, social, governance. I don't think that, I mean, somehow they are connected. Okay, then let's take it. Each one of us, three of us at least, and all the companies in India are working on ESG separately without calling it ESG. And we have been doing it not after it has coined, it was much before we coined. So, all companies in India are working towards ESG. Some say, very loudly, some say less, but everybody is working on governance, everybody is working on social, ESG. And the more important thing is sustainability, that, the social one, climate one. And every company is taking very serious action. Yesterday, Honorable Prime Minister also mentioned about that. So each of us is working on also the climate. So it's nothing that, we have to do something new. We are already working. We are only announcing that. Thank you.
Mr. Panicker, yours.
I'm sorry that I have to slightly differ with them. ESG is no more a fashion like 10 years ago. It is a serious thing. We have to be very conscious that ESG has to be a part of our system, whether it is governance or social engagement or even the environmental thing, because this is actually what is demanded by the public. It is not coming out of anything else. So when we are going to operate in a society, we have to show our responsibility. We are doing from Nayara side, I am saying that we are extremely serious about the ESG factors. First of all, governance. Governance, that the importance I need not say. So social and environmental. Environmental, there was a time that we were permitted to flare. Assume that we have a closer subset. If flare is there for a longer period of time, the society was not bothered. Those days are gone. They are very conscious. They know, very well aware that this is something polluting, having an impact on our life. So we are not permitted to do that. We cannot have any system which is going to have an environmental impact, whether it is air, water, or dust pollution, whatever it is. We have to be very conscious. This is a minimum requirement. That is exactly what we are seeing in the developed world. So when we are marching to a developed country, we have to be very conscious about these hygiene factors. Then social. Social, you see, we also have a responsibility to give back to the society what we are doing, what we are making the profit out of that. So that this sort of thing, Prabh, I think I am seeing some connection between all these three, because and it is a moral responsibility to ensure that we are responsible to the society where we are operating. We are responsible to the government, the legal thing. So it is something, a basic hygiene factor for our future journey, like any other country. Now there are some European countries, that they are not permitted to flare even when a unit is started, which we cannot think, because I don't know how it is possible. But there are, I read only, I have not seen, There are refineries, they have no permission to flare. If they flare, the penalty is so huge that they cannot, there is no reason to start the plant. So that way, we have to be extremely careful. All our future things, this is going to be a very fundamental question. We have to be very conscious. And for example, I can say from Nayara, this is one of the major factors we are discussing in all the strategy meetings. It started with an ESG, how our strategy is going to be complying with our ESG requirement. That is something which we believe is extremely important.
Dr. Faisal, yeah. From Aramco standpoint, and particularly Saudi Arabia, right, because you believe in a circular economy as well, how does ESG come into play, especially for the downstream? Because that's where the bigger challenges are, right?
Yeah, in fact, in Saudi Aramco, we're trying to address that through a lot of R&D, and I think I've just mentioned some examples where we try to improve the efficiency of the engines, capture the CO2. But when it comes to refinery and petrochemicals, we have reviewed every asset of our downstream assets and developed a MAC curve and address how we can reach net zero, because the company announced the net zero by 2050. Especially for scope 1 and 2. So we are investing in different technologies and different applications to achieve that goal. One example is, along with our chemical arm, SABIC, we received an independent certification for blue hydrogen, blue ammonia. So we are also looking at blue hydrogen as a source of energy to reduce the emission. So there are different solutions and will be applicable for different refineries and petrochemical areas.
Dr. Ayed, I mean, we live in a world where I call, not ESG necessarily, but energy transition often a very privileged Western concept, right? When you have a lot, it's very easy to talk about it. Because also, I will also say this in Europe as well. I know, Mr. Panicker, you talked about society, but it's funny that people talk about energy transition a lot, but when it comes to paying for it, nobody, like, we're all for energy transition as long as you pay for it and I don't have to, right? But how do you square that? Because I think that's one of the biggest divergences between, say, the IEA outlook versus OPEC, because they believe in that world, I guess. But I think what you've heard from the panelists is much more support for your outlook.
Well, it's not support or not. It's facts on the ground. And when you build your analysis, and you are an analyst by profession, Amrita, as well as many in the room, you have to start from the basic assumptions and build them upward. We start from the assumption that we will have another 1.5 billion people in the world over the next 23 years. We will see north of 700 million people move into cities. They will require a lot of transportation. They will have to consume a lot of petrochemicals. We also start with the assumption of doubling the economy. All this will require energy, and it is a social responsibility of our industry to ensure catering this growth, or ensure the delivery of it, responsible on the three dimensions. But unfairly, probably the industry has been pushed to deliver more on the E part, unfairly, and that's reflected in the availability of finance when it comes to shareholders' meetings. I think the industry is unfairly probably treated on that dimension. They are always requested or demanded to deliver more on that dimension apart from the three. Remember, it is a three-legged table. It's environment, it's security, and it is development. And you have to look into these three parameters all jointly in a fair manner. So maybe the West is worried about the security part. Maybe in the South or East, they are more worried about the development part, and the whole world is worried about the environment. So the trick is how to balance the three and address them through the available mechanics of finance. I think limiting the finances that we will need for our industries, at least in the oil dimension, and in our outlook, we expect to require more than $14 trillion. Around 11 of it will be in the upstream, 1.2 in the midstream, and then around 1.2 in the downstream. And we've been talking about downstream for the entire session. So for us, to ensure the availability of finance, to cater this energy delivery to the world, at least on the oil dimension, we will have to avail a lot of finances, and a lot of sense has to come to that. And I'm very glad to see some of the demands on the ESG front is loosening the bolts a little bit. I think it's becoming more rational. Remember, our industry is surrounded with humongous uncertainties. When it comes to policy dimension, it's quite uncertain. We see a lot of countries taking a complete U-turn. We've seen the US exiting the climate change negotiations and the IPCC and the Trump administration, and God knows what the next election will be. It's a huge uncertainty. But one way or another, given the uncertainties in the technology breakthrough and the availability of finance and the policy around the world, certain trends are imminent, and one of which we've talked about today is the Indian prominent role going forward and the requirement of energy demand, primarily oil, catering a lot of growth for India and the rest of the world.
So I've got a big screen saying time's up, but I do want to give the very last words to our Indian chairman. All three of you, maybe start with Mr. Panicker and end this way. Very briefly, final words on Indian refining and petrochemicals, the future, or however you want to end.
So last 1 hour, we were very clear about that we need refining capacity for the energy requirement of a growing country. And also we need petrochemicals because the lifestyle is increasing. So these two we have to meet. That is our social responsibility, the commitment, that is our responsibility. At the same time, we have to be conscious about a major concern of the world, that is on the climate change. We have to be very responsibly invest, using all the technologies to ensure that the emission levels are minimized while we are making this growth plan. That is the message I got from the last one.
Fully endorsed, nothing more. I mean, he has covered very well. Thank you.
So the challenge remains more carbon, less emissions. So we'll need to be responsible. So it will be about balancing pathways, about investment, about responsibly invest in refining as well as petchem. So it will be largely configured such a way it moves from transportation to petchem, and it will remain, and we will be responsible as much as possible.
Thank you. I guess my only request to the organizers, if you are to have a refining session next year, maybe give us a bigger room. I feel really bad for all of you guys standing there, but it's also a huge testament to every single one here that so many of you came early in the morning and stood for this. So thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists. It was a really, really enjoyable discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.